the people that you think are your enemies very often have more in common with you than anybody else on the planet. And what happened with Looker was when we got into that next chapter of our lives and started Stitch, and it turned out Looker was a partner, we finally got to meet the Looker team and like spend time with them. They had just been this kind of like amorphous, like shadow universe of people that we hated during Object Metrics that we would lose deals to. And we got to meet them at Stitch. And my co-founder Jake and I, you know, we had a meeting with their exec team, and we looked at each other afterwards and said, damn, they're nice.
I kind of like these guys. That's right.
And in fact, if you look at it, we both spent the same decade trying to solve the same problems for the same people, thinking like we weren't each other's biggest problem, really. Like the real big boogeyman in building one of these companies is product market fit and scalability and like finding the right marketing messaging and like, you know, we just happen to be a thorn in each other's side. But we had basically been on the same exact journey, just in a different building. For so long, and getting in the same room, we had so much in common and so much to talk about. And this, I think without that experience, I'm not sure we could have ever done what we just did at Crossbeam, which is merge with Reveal. Now, Reveal is another company in our direct space in Crossbeam that we've been head to head with in a lot of situations over basically the entire life of the company. But when I met Simon, their CEO, a few years ago, I knew, because of the Looker experience, that this guy is probably not my enemy. He's probably my clone.
Hey, it's Phil, and in this episode of Partnership Plus, we're going to talk to Bob Moore, who's the CEO and co-founder at Crossbeam. If you've ever wondered about how data can be used to get a better sense about who the people are that you could partner with, or frankly, what you could do better to understand how to partner with other organizations, this is the conversation for you. Bob is going to dive into the history of how data has been used and placed and not really used as well as it could have. And I think it's going to help you understand the potential of the data you're setting up. So let's talk to Bob Moore, the CEO and co-founder at Crossbeam. So folks, today we get a chance to talk to Bob Moore. Bob is a guy who has been leading the world of ecosystems and partnerships for some time. We're going to dive into his book. We're going to dive into his company, Crossbeam, the companies he's built before, and why this thing about partnerships is so important to what his world is like. So, hey, Bob, thanks for spending some time with me today.
It is my pleasure. Happy to do it.
Let's dive right in to why it is we've arrived at this conversation. Your book, as I mentioned it before we came on, was an artifact of today's current ecosystem where it's complicated, where it's interesting, where growth can be sustainable and things can work out really well. But there's baggage that comes with this term partnerships. It's a pretty romantic term. And so we want to try and get to a point where today it's something that people can use out of the gate. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Before we get to all of that stuff, let's dive into your backstory because I think it's fascinating. So, let me ask you, what's the Bob Moore backstory?
Yeah. Thanks for asking. I'll try not to over glamorize it. I'm a huge data nerd. I think is maybe the best summary sentence about me. So, going as far back as college, I was an engineering major. I had my first real company in college where I built some software that helps calculate the odds of winning Texas Hold'em poker hands when playing in online casinos. It was kind of my first software business and my first exposure to the awesome things that can happen when you start to see economies of scale in software go-to-market. And then after graduating, having done that poker stuff, it landed me a really cool job, which was I got to work at a venture capital firm right out of college, which is a firm in New York called Insight Partners. They're still very, very active today and have actually grown quite a bit from when I was there. They mostly invest in software and software-enabled businesses. And while I was there, I got to really kind of experience the good, bad, and ugly of a lot of different companies. I got to watch venture firms evaluate businesses, got to work with portfolio companies and understand what made them tick and what made the great ones great. And after about 2 years of doing that, I really, really missed the entrepreneur's journey and decided to leave Insight and start my own company. And that was in 2008. And since then, I have done nothing but be the CEO of a tech company. I've built 3 SaaS businesses. The first 2 RJ Metrics and Stitch Data were very nerdy data analytics businesses. RJ Metrics was like charts and dashboards and customer lifetime value analytics for e-commerce companies. Stitch Data was a data infrastructure business that helps companies move data out of their SaaS tools into data warehouses like Snowflake and Redshift and BigQuery for the purpose of analytics. We had good outcomes in both of those companies. RJ Metrics was acquired by Magento, which is now part of Adobe. Stitch was acquired by Talend. But there was this very interesting through line with all these experiences at Insight, at RJ, at Stitch, at the companies that acquired them, where it felt like there was this category of analytic that was just never able to be explored, which was, hey, I can work all day on making your own company's internal data silo fantastic. And I can tell you all I need to know about, here's how to present the data you already have to yourself in a way that's more actionable. But we'd always get stuck when the question came up, which is, well, what if I want to combine my data with somebody else's data? What if I have a partner and we want to answer a question like, hey, partner, how many customers do we have in common and who are they? Or are my sales reps currently trying to sell into any of the same companies that your sales reps are trying to sell into? Well, you get kind of stuck there. And I did for 15 years of my career. I got stuck there trying to answer these kinds of questions, both as an operator and as like a product creator, because to answer those questions, you basically need to draw a Venn diagram between two distinct data sets that were designed to not be combined. They live within their own security profiles. They live within their own walled gardens inside of the systems of record where they live. They have their own data models and data structures on top of them, their own data definitions. A simple question like how many customers do we have in common turns into a really complex question really quickly. So in 2018, after we sold Stitch, I embarked on this journey to try to create something that could do a better job of solving that problem and basically allow for companies to collaborate across company lines to answer data-driven questions where that data needed to intersect in order to find the answer. So it's a super wonky way of explaining how I arrived at Crossbeam, which is the company I've been running for the last 6 years. But it all started with me being a big data nerd and being really frustrated that there was a class of analytics that were unreachable by every company out there. And I wanted to basically go into this corner of the market where no one had ever cracked the problem before. And that's really what we've been up to. So I didn't say the word partnerships there once, which is an interesting angle on it, but it is really true that the whole thing came through this, this data nerd angle of my background.
It's funny, anyone who's listening to this who knows my background in science and biotechnology is just shaking their head saying data sets that don't talk to each other, data sets that if they could talk to each other would unlock unbelievable value. And people are just beating their heads against walls trying to work out how to maintain provenance, knowledge, ownership, and transfer. And it's just an impossible task in most cases.
Oh, it's a nightmare. It's like I could spend an hour like elaborating, but just like a couple of point things that are so like everybody understands these, right? It's like, okay, I am selling to Delta Airlines and you're selling to Delta Faucets. How do we know that it's the same company or not, right? Or when we started Crossbeam, the domain name was getcrossbeam.com and my email address was bob@getcrossbeam.com. Well, at some point in time, we were fortunate enough to be able to buy crossbeam.com. So all of our emails changed and all of our web identities changed. And like, if one of our partners or one of the companies that we bought from has Get Crossbeam as the company and the other has Crossbeam, how do we make sure that a match is a match? The fidelity of that data over very long time periods and the quality of that matching algorithm, you could build a whole company just doing that, to say nothing of the security and privacy related implications of doing this work and needing to make sure that every company can adhere to the constraints of their own internal policies around how like data gets managed in situations like these where you collaborate across company lines. It's like I feel like we had to build 10 companies worth of technology in order to solve this one problem. And they just happen to all be, fluidly pulled together in this singular platform.
Yeah, I get it. Tell me, before we get to Crossbeam, what was in your upbringing that made you love data?
It's a great question. I want to say that in a lot of ways it was like the great equalizer. It felt like something where there was a disproportionality between how much I liked it and how much it lit up my brain,
Mm-hmm.
and how little the average person understood it.
Yeah.
And I think to a lot of people, like when I kind of arrived on the scene as a college grad and as a new employee, it was in the very early days of what was like the big data movement. Like you tune into 3 years ago, you tune into the Super Bowl, they're all talking about crypto. This year, they're all going to be talking about AI. Well, 15, 20 years ago, everybody was talking about big data.
Yeah.
So it was like this kind of magical, mystical thing that was not extremely well understood by the market, that I felt like even as a young person in my career, I had a really, really good handle on, because of my college major, by the way, was not computer science. It was this field called operations research, which is this field developed during World War II, all having to do with, it's like a mixture of statistics and computer science and economics.
Yeah.
So it's like, how do you design systems with systems thinking that take advantage of the rules of probability and statistics to create highly reliable outcomes that kind of fall into an area where you are better off than how you started. And that's how I got into poker. It's like, solving for how do you play this poker hand is like maybe the ultimate operations research problem, because it's this it's a stochastic system. It's got these undetermined things in it that are probability driven, but it also is so incredibly driven by process and methodology and a high volume of outcomes, with a lot of variability and a human factor with bluffing and everything, which is like, it's the perfect problem. But anyway, long-winded answer to your question, right? I think that it on the 2x2 matrix of like, I really enjoyed it, and there was a scarcity in the market of people who really understood it. It just like hit in the right way. And then it's one of these things where, you start going down that rabbit hole, and then all of a sudden you're known as like a specialist in the thing. And then that gives you this positive reinforcement loop to like geek out on it even more, and gives you the permission to continue learning in your career. And then you wake up one day and you're like, someone asks you about your personal story, and the first thing you say is that you're a data nerd, right? It's just, it kind of, it was like a self-fulfilling prophecy, I guess.
So let's jump to Crossbeam.
Yeah.
Fascinating company, 6 years in. Tell us about that, and why did you start it, given what you'd done before?
Yeah, so, I gave you a little bit of that backstory, right? I think I was fascinated with this problem space of how do you allow companies to collaborate in a data-driven way? And when I looked around at the collaborations happening, both in the companies I had created and the companies that had acquired them, data-driven would be a stretch. Like the closest thing approximating what you can now do in Crossbeam was this practice called account mapping, which is basically an exercise of emailing a bunch of spreadsheets back and forth between partner managers and playing Battleship. And it's like, do you have any open opportunities in D7, and trying to, maybe the most sophisticated algorithm you would ever see is like a complex VLOOKUP function, right? When somebody's got two Excel sheets side by side, and it's not modern tech. And absent that, partnerships, I think, was an area that was honestly relegated to this reputation of like hugs and chugs, right? It's like, let's go to conferences and high five and, drink a bunch of beers at the bar after the event, and maybe something sparks and we identify some area to work on together. But it's very disjointed, and it makes it very difficult to measure your wins, and more importantly, it makes it difficult to scale your wins, especially in technology partnerships, kind of outside of the traditional channel motions. So the origin for Crossbeam was, hey, I want to solve this problem. And the first thing I did was went to prospective customers and asked them about how this problem manifests in the way they run their businesses. And I immediately got pulled into the universe of partnerships and partner ecosystems, and this account mapping challenge that exists. Because a lot of times when there is collaboration across company lines, it just gets kind of thrown under this partnerships umbrella, because there's not anywhere else to put it, and it's really hard to do. So it's kind of like where a lot of these really good ideas, go to die. And as Crossbeam came onto the scene, and we were able to actually start solving this problem for a lot of companies, the fun thing has been the elevation of what it does beyond just the partnerships or into the go-to-market org at large. And I'm sure I'll talk about that more later, but it's that's kind of been the journey. But yeah, it was kind of look, if I hadn't started Crossbeam, somebody would have. This is not a thing where, there's some ingenuity by the entrepreneur, like made something from nothing. I think there was a incredible amount of market demand for this. And I just tapped into the right thing at the right time here.
You mentioned before how you can almost track at the Super Bowl what the trend of the time is through the advertising that's going on at the
It's
time.
so true.
And,
Yeah.
you sort of look back and we see a lot of things evolving. Like I remember coming out of the military and the idea of a data warehouse seemed to be pretty
Yeah.
interesting because the data could be surfaced. Then there was a data lake. And then I'm
Uh-huh.
sure there's a
Uh-huh.
whole bunch of other nature related euphemisms that come in to sort of describe how data can be pooled and transferred and used. So much is changing quickly now, and people are telling me in our work that the ability to partner is probably the only sustainable way to continue growing.
Yep.
So when you think about how much has changed in tech, what are the themes you're seeing right now for companies that you support and what they're grappling with? Like, what are the big themes they're trying to get their heads around?
Yeah. Well, there's a lot going on all at once right now.
Mm.
So you have, and I'll just mention a few kind of really specific trends, and then I can mention how they all combine into this realm, right? So one of them is just the macro economy and this journey that we've been on since COVID, where we had this long extended period of extremely low interest rates, where you had this somewhat perverse incentive system that companies had to prioritize growth over all else, including efficiency and profitability and frankly, like rational thinking when it comes to dollars in, dollars out in a lot
Yeah.
of cases. And what that led to was an absolute explosion in the number of things that you could do to grow your business and ways that you could invest your dollars. Because as long as they created that top line growth as an output, then the cost basis and kind of the financial systems that governed it weren't really assessed with too much scrutiny as an input. So, things like going really, really deep on the old school methodologies of predictable revenue and hiring armies of outbound sales reps, things like investing really heavily in online advertising and ABM strategies, things in the realm of inbound marketing and
Mm.
content generation that I love those strategies actually, but they can have a really long time to value because
Yep.
you kind of have to like build up almost like a media company within your business to make them work. In a lot of businesses, what happened after interest rates started going back up again is that there was a bit of a wake up call around, okay, which one of these things is actually working? And so that's trend number one, is like this kind of swoop. Well, trend number two, which is happening at the same time, is you have all these other factors that are actually making all these strategies not work anymore. One of them is regulation, right? GDPR, CCPA, a lot of the work that's been done at the operating system level by folks like Apple to like block cookie creation and tracking of users across apps. These are all things that make online targeted advertising inventories go down, that make online advertising less efficient and more expensive, and just generally the cost basis for targeting people with paid advertising, especially in B2B, just like that the equation has kind of gone upside down, for a lot of folks over that time period. And then, of course, there's AI and the impact of AI on things like inbound marketing and content generation. And when you can have an AI agent that costs virtually nothing, write a blog post for you every minute, right? That's as good as even 51% of the entry level content marketers out there. Then that playbook really gets turned on its head. To say nothing of where's all the search volume going? Well, it's going into the LLMs themselves. Like
Mm.
how much is Google even a destination for kind of answering questions anymore? And it's kind of flipping that whole strategy around. So, and then outbound calling. Well, there's so much automation. AI impacts this, and kind of the maturity of the tech stack and tool stack surrounding it impact this, where it just is people can receive an infinite number of emails, but the amount of time they can spend in their inbox is finite, which means as more and more people run the strategy, it's like a negative sum game. Like it becomes
Yep.
less effective for everybody. And when it
Mhm.
reaches this like maturity out there on its own market adoption, it actually kind of renders itself almost useless, right? So yeah, a lot of companies kind of being stuck, right? So you've got this thing where there's this macroeconomic thing where there's a massive amount of focus on efficiency and efficient growth, but then you also have all of these factors that are basically making the tools of efficient growth not work anymore. And we combine those. It's not a surprise that you've got a market that's out there clamoring for some next generation approach to actually driving growth inside of their businesses in a way that's proprietary and that's scalable, and that kind of makes economic sense in suit. So this is where ecosystem-led growth comes into play, and this is where kind of this new generation of partner leveraging partner ecosystems to basically be the main driver of growth inside of a modern company. And there's a million playbooks, and I go into this in the book in great detail, but this is not your grandpa's partner strategy, right? The playbook here is not, hey, let's get a bunch of partners and get a billion intros from our partners and have a million phone calls where like our partner manager and their partner manager and the mutual sales reps get on the phone and, collaborate and exchange ideas and, maybe an intro to a customer comes out of it. That playbook is fine, but it's not even in my top 5 because it doesn't scale. The real playbook here is about intelligence. It's about ecosystem intelligence, and it's about market signal. And it's about, if you live in a world where Crossbeam exists and you can actually know what your partners know about all the companies that you want to sell to, then what you can also know is all of this information that's going to influence who is the right target at the right time and what messaging and approach is actually going to result in them being a more likely buyer for you. It's signal. And the third major trend that influences all this is the emergence of the API economy and the fact that people don't buy technology products in a vacuum anymore. You're not just buying whatever your next piece of software is because you like the UI or you like the sales rep. The top reason people make a selection is because of how well any given piece of technology interoperates with what they already have or what they're putting together. And that's both from a services and human expertise standpoint and also from the rest of your tech stack. So like in my old space, the data analytics space, like back when we had RJ Metrics, it was a standalone like monolithic tool that did the whole thing soup to nuts. Today, if you want to replicate that, you've got to buy a data warehouse from Snowflake and you've got to put DBT on top of it for data modeling, and you've got to buy Fivetran to pump the data into there, and then you've got to buy Hex or Omni or any of these, or Tableau, and kind of put it on top as a data visualization tool. And you are buying a stack. You're not buying an individual product. So if buyer behavior has changed so that they have to buy in stacks, then the most informative and influential thing that you can know about a buyer is what's going on in their stack, how are they assembling it, who are the people responsible for it, and is now the right time for you to engage because there is very specific signal there around that. And that's what that ecosystem data is. And for so many companies, being able to tap into that, it doesn't require an intro phone call with a partner. It just requires deep collaboration with the companies in your ecosystem so you can all win together. And you can run playbooks that don't suffer from these inefficiencies of just like random ad hoc demand generation campaigns, which is what all those old dying types tend to suffer from.
I mean, this is fascinating, Bob. Like if we were to take this outside of the software arena, right? And the software arena is massive, continuing to grow. When you look at companies who are not software companies, who listen to that and just say, wouldn't it be incredible if we could do that? And we're talking about things like, construction companies and infrastructure companies and things which are very physical compared to software. Yeah. How does this kind of approach help them? Can it be leveraged into those kind of industries which are non-software native industries?
Absolutely, yeah. And it's so fun being at Crossbeam right now, because if you asked me this question even 2 years ago, I would have probably been able to give you more like a theoretical style answer, like academically why it's true. You look at our customer base today, it's wild. We have moved so many mountains in a bunch of these different areas that sit so far outside of software, distribution and supply chain, construction, finance and accounting. There are just so many industries that it started out with kind of they're like software adjacent, but then you get this like 6 degrees of separation thing where like partners invite their partners, and you start out with some software companies and you end up in this other universe of like, manufacturers of trade show swag. And it's like, how did I end up in this vertical? Well, we've got this incredible thriving ecosystem of companies connected to each other in that world. So it has been really fun to watch the ecosystem graph itself kind of divest itself naturally and organically out of being so software concentrated, although that was kind of the historical atomic network that we had. So how do companies do it? Well, you got to think about just like it, ironically, outside of software, there's actually more partnership activity built into the way that most businesses run than not, right? And so many businesses that kind of exist outside of the digital continuum because physical goods are involved. there is a literal distribution problem, right? Distribution doesn't mean like signing up and turning on AWS and putting Cloudflare out in front of it and getting it into people's hands. Like distribution means like if you are a forklift manufacturer, you've probably got dealerships and you've probably got distributors and you've probably got aftermarket parts manufacturers and you've probably got catalog retailers and you've got warehousers, and these people all exist inside of a supply chain. And where there's a supply chain, there's a collaboration across company lines. And there's also these very specific buyer and customer experiences that you want to create at the end of that line that require the tight collaboration of everybody who's involved. But again, these companies are very often not under the same hood. And there are these data protections that exist. And there's this carefulness that exists around, I'm not going to share my whole customer list with X, Y, or Z. And anywhere where you feel like you have a risk of channel conflict, where you might take some action that's accidentally disadvantageous to one of your channel partners, then you likely have a place for Crossbeam to get inserted right in the middle. And even a great example that's really concrete is like, if you think about services businesses and people that kind of provide services alongside, say, a physical good, right? Like a forklift. I'll keep that example going, right? Then it matters a lot that I, as the retailer that sold the forklift, but who doesn't do the service, refer my customer to the right service provider. Now, I might have 50 service providers that are partners of mine. They're not going to tell me their whole customer list. Like that's treasured information. And I'm not going to give them my whole customer list for the same reasons. But the ability to know when there's an intersection where someone that I'm working with already has a trusted relationship with this party, and in fact, maybe they actually did some work with them just a few months ago, being able to draw just that Venn diagram and identify when that overlap exists is incredibly powerful, because it means that dealer is now not going to accidentally send their customer off to some random other service provider in some kind of round robin scheme or based on some other criteria. You want to make sure that you keep the relationships where the relationships are, and all companies in that universe make some efforts to try and do this. But again, it's like playing battleship style things, right? You just don't always know that a customer of yours has just started engaging with one of your partners simultaneously. And it would be to your benefit to kind of collaborate with them and creating a good experience for that customer. That visibility is not always there for a whole host of reasons. You can create it by inserting something like Crossbeam in the middle to get just the data that matters at the time that it matters exchanged, while keeping everything else private and secure. So there are just so many. If you feel like, oh man, I wish I could peek into my partner's CRM system, it sure would make my job easier. There's probably a use case for Crossbeam that's mutually beneficial for you and your partner that will actually allow you to do that. But instead of looking at their whole CRM, you're getting the very, very specific sliver of data that's going to change the way you behave. And that's a really big deal, and it has nothing to do with software.
I'm going to read something you've already covered. This was the back of your book, which, like I said before, I'm disappointed didn't arrive before we got to connect, because I don't think there are enough resources in this world that talk to this modern kind of approach to what we're talking about. So your book is called Ecosystem-Led Growth. One of the headlines is, and I quote, "You'll discover why partnerships are no longer the domain of partner people smoozing at conferences. Instead, they can be used to unlock vast amounts of data, new relationships, and scalable growth plays." Now, that is music to my ears. I'm sure it is music to many leaders who are listening to this right now. And we'll link to this book in the show notes because I highly recommend it. If somebody was to read that book, or they were trying to get the notes of this book, what are the 2 or 3 key things that you would love to ram home as an insight for them to sort of hold on to? Because most CEOs that I work with are grappling with all the things we just talked about. And they know instinctively that there is a better way to ecosystem and partner, yet they have a history of these partnerships ultimately failing. Yeah. And that is from yesteryear, right? This is not from, what it was like, what it's like now. So what should they take away from this? What's the playbook that you'd love them to put into their mind?
Yeah, look, if there's one thing that I would do in any company, my kind of wave a magic wand thing that I would want to see that's true is an understanding that this is actually not the partnership team's job to make this successful. the partnership team you can think of almost as like an ops layer, like an enablement layer that is necessary but not sufficient for a company to roll out a strategy like this. And a great partnerships team will unlock all this value and make it very, very possible for your business to roll out this strategy. But this strategy is going to live with your revenue team and your go-to-market team. It's going to live with RevOps, getting the right data into the right systems so that it's available to your reps. It's going to live with sales enablement to train your reps and other folks in your go-to-market team to understand, the playbooks that you can run by using this data. And it's going to live with sales leadership to hold teams accountable to actually executing on this huge amount of leverage that you can get out of these programs. And I think where these things go to languish, or in the worst cases to die, is when there's an idea that, we should be doing more of this ecosystem-led growth stuff, and it gets assigned to a partnership leader in a vacuum without a wider kind of company level mandate. And you think about it, and where else is that even remotely true, right? Like if you read predictable revenue and you buy Outreach or Sales Loft to automate outbound programs, like, you better believe that there's a C-suite executive who directly carries quota that's going to be watching that thing and holding the team accountable to it, and kind of like directly involved in the implementation and rollout of that strategy. If you subscribe to ABM or anything in the marketing department on the demand gen side, you better believe there's the CMO. It's going to be one of their big budget investment items, and there's going to be team members focused on it. But I think when you look at something that kind of has this amorphous word partner anywhere near it, a lot of times it gets shipped off to Partnerships Island. And the partner team is kind of left in this interesting vacuum where they're expected to do all of the above, but they don't have C-level support. And they don't really have line of sight into the big discussions about how do we prioritize what the team's being trained on, and how this stuff really comes to life. So this is a go-to-market strategy that you should think of as kind of akin to something as big as an outbound strategy, or as big as a ABM or demand gen strategy. Like, it's a top of the pile, needs to be a strategic focus at the C-suite level inside of your business. And the partner team they will fail left alone, because they, by the laws of physics, can't do it on their own, because so much of the upside is a byproduct of the behaviors of humans that are not on their team, that they have no influence over. Yeah. And this is where that misalignment is, when you see a big wave of layoffs happen in the press, as we did over the last several years, and partnership teams get massacred. It's because where that is happening is inside of companies where that misalignment exists. And partner teams have been kind of thought of as this silo within the business that, that doesn't permeate into the way you run the company at large.
Let's go back to the more fundamental nature of partnerships and the ecosystem. You've built some pretty spectacular partnerships in your time that may have led to acquisition, but I think more fundamentally, you partner with people every single day. What do you think of those foundational elements of a fantastic partnership?
Yeah, I have some great stories of this, and I think this is honestly, it's a little bit of the Crossbeam origin story that I kind of glazed over. But if you look at Stitch, my second company, there's a middleware business, right? So what we did is we sucked data out of your favorite SaaS tools that you use, and like your Salesforce and MailChimp and Stripe and wherever else your like systems of records were for what's going on with your customers. And then we would deposit them into a data warehouse like Snowflake or Amazon Redshift or BigQuery, which is where all your analytics data lives. So you get all your data under one hood. We're the ones who do it. So we're this glue layer. Mm-hmm. So no one buys Stitch without buying other stuff too. So I talked before about stacks, perfect example, right? Like we existed inside of these stacks. So we as a business ended up with some really, really interesting and valuable strategic partnerships with companies that were way larger than us very early on in our life, because we helped them achieve outcomes that they wanted. And one of the ones I always love to point to is Looker. Looker back in the RJ Metrics days was like public enemy number one. We hated them. We competed with them all the time. But in my second company, Stitch, we were a very close strategic partner to them. So our enemies became our friends. Yeah. And what was cool about Looker was Looker is a business intelligence platform, and the big wow moment in their product is you get to see these dashboards with your data in them, and it's kind of like where you see the pulse of what's going on in your business. Well, if part of that pulse of what's going on in your business is all the data that comes out of Stripe, and that data is not in your data warehouse, Looker can't sell their product. So these Looker sales reps learned that, like, in order for us to deliver our dashboards, the data needs to be there. And the best way to get the data there and get it there quickly is actually for our customers to also be using Stitch. So we became this incredible kind of co-sell engine that existed, where our products were just better when people were using both of them side by side. And the amount of kind of co-selling and market collaboration and cross-pollinating of the customer bases that happened there was huge. And it allowed us to just grow at this really disproportionate rate. So such that, when we were, less than 2 years old, we got acquired by Talent, which is another company that kind of, existed in our space that viewed us as kind of a gateway into the era of the cloud, and the way in which a lot of what they had done on a legacy basis with on-premise systems was kind of migrating its way out into the cloud world. So our acquisition, I don't think, would have ever happened without the Looker partnership, which triggered the high velocity revenue growth through ecosystem-led growth strategies. So I've seen this firsthand, and I've seen the power of it. And I think that's where those dots get connected.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Because I think the key lesson for that is, in one life, it might seem like a very adversarial relationship, in a very next life, which is very, very just around the corner, it becomes very different. So just be mindful about how.
Oh yeah, and I'll put a cherry on top of that statement, because I agree with it so much, and it is something that it took me a decade into my career to actually realize, which is the people that you think are your enemies very often have more in common with you than anybody else on the planet. And what happened with Looker was, when we got into that next chapter of our lives and started Stitch, and it turned out Looker was a partner, we finally got to meet the Looker team and like spend time with them. They had just been this kind of like amorphous, like shadow universe of people that we hated during RJ Metrics that we would lose deals to. And we got to meet them at Stitch. And my co-founder, Jake, and I, we had a meeting with their exec team, and we looked at each other afterwards, and we said, damn, they're nice.
I kind of like these guys. That's right.
And in fact, if you look at it, we both spent the same decade trying to solve the same problems for the same people, thinking like we weren't each other's biggest problem, really. Like the real big boogeyman in building one of these companies is product market fit and scalability, and like finding the right marketing messaging, and like, we just happen to be a thorn in each other's side. But we had basically been on the same exact journey, just in a different building. For so long, and getting in the same room, we had so much in common and so much to talk about. And this, I think, without that experience, I'm not sure we could have ever done what we just did at Crossbeam, which is merge with Reveal. Now, Reveal is another company in our direct space in Crossbeam that we've been head to head with in a lot of situations over basically the entire life of the company. But when I met Simon, their CEO, a few years ago, I knew, because of the Looker experience, that this guy is probably not my enemy. He's probably my clone, or I'm his clone, right? And that turned out to be really true. Like, from a values alignment standpoint all the way out, the most opportunistic and exciting deals that have happened in my career have been adjacently related to me suddenly becoming very good friends with someone that was once my worst enemy. I think this leads to an operational mindset. I think that also can be very, very, very helpful when you're building one of these companies. It's just like, life is long, and empathy is important, and demonizing other humans usually has diminishing marginal returns.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, what a fantastic insight. We talked previously before about, how these partnerships fail. And in a large company, that lack of alignment, the ability for partnerships teams to be on that island, that's a big problem. What are the other issues that people should be keeping an eye out for when they say we're going to enter into this ecosystem strategy beyond the right enablement and the right alignment? Where are the other pitfalls?
Yeah, so beyond alignment, I think there's an element here where it requires a really important mentality shift, and understanding of almost like the old way and the new way of
Mhm.
thinking about partnerships in general. And I use this example sometimes of, if you think about partnership programs that have worked kind of prior to the era of Crossbeam and where there was less data available, and you think about what's the currency of a really good, successful partner program, in a lot of cases, it kind of boiled down to intros, right? Like, hey, the best thing that a partnership team can do is like intro me to a new potential customer or
Yep.
make me an intro to a partner that can help on a deal. And a lot of that currency then materializes as a phone call, and it materializes as time on the calendar that gets consumed, and it materializes as deals that maybe they're more likely to close, but they get a little bit more complicated because there's more parties involved. And, there's like a skepticism that exists among sales reps. And it kind of leads to this thing that we observe called the partner paradox, which is,
Mhm.
when we survey companies, partner teams are always convinced that they can statistically prove this incredible amount of value that they're creating. And yet, when you look at the way the company's budget and what gets cut in layoffs and everything else, you would assume the exact opposite, right? Like
Yep.
that evidence is not there. So that's the paradox. It's like, how can they be so certain of the value and yet also it not being actually believed in by the other people that run the company and make these decisions? And it is because when your intros become your currency, then you put a very real cap on the amount of value that you can create. First of all, it feels very strategic and very deal to deal and very like, the way that I measure the value here is I take the amount of money that I'm spending on this entire partner universe and I divide it by the number of intro calls that have been held, and then boom, there's your cost per lead, and let me compare that to buying some Google ads, right? And it leads to this very perverse math when layoffs are happening or budgets are tightening. That's just like unhealthy.
Mhm.
But B, it actually puts a finite cap on how much you can do because there's only so much calendar time in the day, and there are a lot of sales reps that are skeptical of complicating deals with extra conversations and humans in the loop, and it kind of just like muddies the waters a lot, and it gets partnerships into this place where it's limited in what it can become.
Mhm.
And breaking free of that does really require a little bit of a gut check on why are we doing this in the first place, and a reorientation of that into something that is understood to be much more strategic in nature, because in fact it should be influencing and touching effectively every single deal. And not via an intro call, and not because the partner is going to swoop in and personally have a conversation with your prospect that pushes them one way or another. They can, but that's not the only play. The data, the intelligence, the signals, the ability to contextualize the way you approach accounts, from demand generation to territory assignment to forecasting to the execution of the deal, all should be viewed through the ecosystem lens, because it's the lens that your buyer is using to decide whether or not they're going to buy. So I think it really is that kind of philosophy and understanding business wide. I think requires a little bit of a gut check, and in some cases a bit of a reinvention of what it means to have a successful partner program.
Yeah, I love that. So look, we're going to get into the rapid fire, which happens at the end of every one of these episodes.
Yeah.
Before we get to that, I've got one question for you, which is, what are leaders missing when it comes to thinking about strategic alliances, partnerships, ecosystems? Like, what is it? What are they missing about
Mhm.
what could go on here?
Yeah, well, I think one of the things that is very different across many different companies, and you'll find a lot of diversity in it, is how these teams are held accountable and how they're measured, and what success actually looks like.
Mhm.
And I think there is this thing that's very common, which is that you'll see partner teams get kind of measured and rewarded on things like influenced revenue, or in some cases it's sourced revenue. In some organizations where partnership teams are focused on tech partnerships, they might even roll into the product org and they get measured on the number of monthly active users that use the integration, or maybe even something less concrete like the number of integrations that exist in the first place that have
Mhm.
like gotten built, right? Like you see these metrics all over the place. One thing I can promise you is no matter what I just mentioned on that list, if you walk that into like the CRO's office, or you're walking into the boardroom and you put it on a slide as a metric that matters, you're going to get a lot of head scratches at best, right?
Mhm.
Like this is not aligned with what the actual senior most leadership at the company talks about when they talk about the success of the business. What they talk about is the soup to nuts sales pipeline. How much demand is getting generated? At what rate are these deals closing? What are the ACVs that we're seeing? What is the time to close? What's our competitive win rate? What's the retention and customer lifetime value look like on the back end after the customer gets closed? Like, that's the stuff that matters. So like things like influenced revenue, they are useful to the partner team for justifying their own existence, but they're not necessarily useful in and of themselves to the CRO. The CRO wants a healthy mix of kind of leads and demand coming from a lot of sources. And when you start splitting hairs about the nuance of multi-touch attribution, it's usually in situations where things are scarce, right? There's a scarcity problem. And it is much better to be in an environment where you're undeniably directly influencing and touching such a high proportion of everything that's going through the sales pipeline for the company, that the question of attribution is not the question. It's a question of how do we do more of this? How do we expand? How do we scale? How do we think about a bigger version of the deployment against this? And I'm sure there's plenty of partner people out there saying, hey, easier said than done, buddy. But I see this really happening in the real world in a lot of our best customers who have rolled out these ELG strategies, where there's this evolution that happens and the metrics that matter to the partner team become much more tightly aligned and eventually identical to the metrics that matter inside of the actual go-to-market and revenue teams, and then ultimately the board of the company. And that's the promised land, is closing that air gap between what success is actually defined as for your group.
Totally get that. Bob, where am I going to send people to come and learn more about you and Crossbeam?
Yeah, crossbeam.com is the place to be. We have an awesome newsletter called ELG Insider that's totally free. We email every week. It's not too aggressive, but we have just the best case studies and stories and kind of deep dives on this stuff landing right in your inbox every week. So definitely sign up for that. And then, my book is called Ecosystem Led Growth. It's published by Wiley. You can find it Barnes and Noble, airport bookstores, etc. And of course on Amazon. So just Ecosystem Led Growth by Bob Moore. Pick it up wherever books are sold.
Amazing. Okay, let's do this rapid fire. Let's see what your answers are to these questions. We do a couple of things related to the heavy lift of working, and then a few other personal bits and pieces. So let's dive in.
Sure. Yeah.
Complete this sentence. Partnership is
an overloaded term.
What content are you currently loving at the moment?
Oh, I am. This has nothing to do with business. I'm a huge comedy fan. It's like my. I'm not funny enough that I think I could have made a career out of it or anything. But as a fan, I pay a lot of attention. So I listen to a lot of bizarre, random comedy podcasts. I love I follow Saturday Night Live like weirdly closely. So there's Dana Carvey and David Spade have a podcast out called Fly on the Wall, where they interview old SNL performers and alums. And I've been ravenously consuming all those episodes. It's great.
I learned about that through Smartless, and it was a great rabbit hole to sort of get carried across to. Fantastic.
Yeah. It's awesome.
All right. What's the worst piece of advice you've received and why?
Oh, wow. I think anytime I've gotten advice that amounts to someone else is going to save you has been bad advice. One of my mantras in building companies is no one is coming to save us. I always say that to all of our teams. And it's like at a lot of companies, you'll get into this like endless loop where it's like, if we just close this next big customer, everything will be great and the world will be fantastic. And everything will be easy from here on out. Or if we close this next big venture capital round and we get all this money in the bank, all our problems will go away. Or if we make this next big hire, we just need a really good VP of sales and it'll solve all our product market fit problems and we'll grow faster. None of that is ever true. Like the idea that some very specific finite event or person is going to magically address the deepest, most fundamental things that are challenging about whatever situation you're in is a fallacy. And I've kind of lived through enough. I have both muscle memory and scar tissue from experiences of having to deal with that. And I think it's thinking that one magical hire is going to be the cure to everything is not a place to go for long-term stability.
I agree. I couldn't agree more, actually. All right. So, question 4: when you see potential for a new partnership, what's the first thing you do to turn that potential into action?
Yeah, this is great. Look, this is a self-serving answer, but my hope would be that most companies at this point would answer it in the same way, which is you connect on Crossbeam. One of the cool things on Crossbeam, so you're able to compare your CRM data to theirs. And if you're in the early stages of kind of like feeling out a partnership or evaluating one, you can actually turn on this data sharing mode that is just summary results only. So without sharing the names of any overlapping customers or any data at all that kind of goes down to like identifying specific companies or people, you can know that you've got 47 customers in common and that your sales team is currently trying to sell to 15 deals that have $1 million worth of ARR pegged to them that happen to be in the customer base of your partner. And, the inverse of that statistic. And there's this really cool matrix of overlap between the CRM data that you can summarize, and you can compare that to what that matrix looks like for partners that have been really successful with you that exist and ones that haven't, and kind of place and diagnose how much you want to invest in that. So it's a really great mode to use Crossbeam in, which is more kind of the discover mode.
I love that. I feel like I want to dive into that in a different conversation, because that seems like a fascinating first step forward.
It's so cool. Yeah.
Super cool. All right. Last question. What's one thing you're deeply grateful for right now?
Oh, my kids. I have a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old, and they are adorable and keep me very grounded. And I didn't have kids until I'm in my early 40s now. So in my mid 30s, I kind of started having kids. So I spent 15 years of my career without them, and I think was a much more stressed out, overly self-conscious, just like ball of anxiety kind of person. And like the amount of perspective that comes from having little ones around, I don't think I appreciated it even remotely until they were here. But I'm so grateful for them. Yeah.
That's awesome. Bob, it has been awesome talking to you today. Thank you for giving up the time. This insight has been remarkable, and I'm super, super interested for all the conversations that can be established as a background of this conversation. Tell me, beyond where people can go and find information from you and your company, where's the best way for them to connect with you so that they can start a conversation?
Yeah. I'm a big LinkedIn guy. That's the place to be. I'm just Bob Moore, CEO of Crossbeam on LinkedIn. Easy to find.
Awesome. Thanks, Bob.
Cool. Thank you, Phil. Always a pleasure.
Hey, it's Phil, and thank you so much for making it to the end of this episode of Partnership Plus. If you're one of the 61% of people who have discovered this episode and you haven't subscribed to the YouTube channel, please go ahead and do that. The bigger the channel, the bigger the guests. Thanks again, and I'll see you in the next episode.